The silence after battle was almost worse than the fighting itself. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the debris field that had been the Harvester fleet drift through space. Hundreds of crystalline husks floated like enormous corpses, their once perfect geometry now broken and lifeless. The human fleet had won, but at a cost that made victory taste like ash. Nearly half the United Fleet was gone. Thousands of ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people dead, and the Pathfinder, carrying the child who had saved them all, was nothing more than scattered atoms in the void. "Begin search and recovery operations," Admiral Sullivan ordered, though her voice was hollow. "Look for survivors. Look for anything we can bring home." They searched for 3 days but found nothing. The Pathfinder had been completely destroyed, its crew lost with no bodies to recover, no graves to mark their sacrifice. Danny Harper, Dr. Helen Price, Captain Linda Shaw, and everyone else aboard had simply ceased to exist. On Earth, Lisa and Greg Harper received the news in their home in New Seattle. An officer in full dress uniform came to their door, hat in hand, and told them their son was gone. Lisa collapsed, her screams of grief echoing through the neighborhood. Greg stood frozen, unable to process that his boy, his brave and beautiful boy, was never coming home. The memorial service was held a week later in the capital city of New Geneva. Millions attended in person, and billions watched from around the world and across human space. Admiral Sullivan spoke, her voice strong despite the pain visible in her eyes. "Danny Harper was 8 years old," she said, standing before a holographic image of the boy's smiling face. "He should have had a lifetime ahead of him. He should have grown up, gone to school, fallen in love, seen all the wonders that the galaxy has to offer. Instead, he gave that future away so that the rest of us could have ours. He saw what was coming and didn't run from it. He stood tall, faced impossible odds, and won. Danny Harper saved humanity, and we will never forget him." They erected a statue in the center of New Geneva. It showed a young boy looking up at the stars with wonder and determination in his eyes. The inscription read simply, "Danny Harper, the first seer, who saw the future and changed it." In the weeks following the victory, humanity began to understand what Danny had truly accomplished. The Harvesters had been a plague upon the galaxy for millions of years, destroying countless civilizations and consuming entire worlds. Danny's disruption of their collective consciousness hadn't just saved Earth, it had effectively ended the Harvester threat everywhere. Reports came in from distant star systems of Harvester fleets suddenly going dormant, their ships drifting powerlessly through space. Other species, survivors who had been hiding from the Harvesters for generations, began to emerge. They sent messages to Earth, thanking humanity for what their child warrior had done. The victory inspired hope across the galaxy. If the Harvesters could be defeated, then perhaps other threats could be faced and overcome as well. But for Danny's parents, none of that mattered. They had lost their son, and no amount of gratitude from strangers could fill that void. Lisa spent her days in Danny's room, holding his toys and reading his notebooks filled with drawings of the stars. Greg threw himself into work, building ships that would never need to carry his son away again. 6 months after the battle, Dr. Price's final research notes were released to the public. She had continued documenting Danny's abilities right up until the end, and her findings changed everything humanity thought they knew about the brain and consciousness. She had proven that the human mind was capable of far more than anyone imagined, that some people could literally see across space and time. The government began screening children for signs of quantum cognitive abilities similar to Danny's. They found dozens within the first year, then hundreds. It seemed that humanity's expansion into space had triggered something dormant in human genetics, awakening abilities that had been sleeping for millennia. These children were carefully identified and gently trained, never forced but always supported. They became known as seers, and they helped guide humanity into a new age. They could predict natural disasters before they happened, see threats emerging from distant space, and even glimpse possible futures. With their guidance, humanity avoided countless dangers and made better decisions about their expansion across the galaxy. But none of the new seers were as powerful as Danny had been. He remained unique, the first and strongest of his kind. The others could see fragments and possibilities, but Danny had seen with perfect clarity. Perhaps that was why he had been chosen for such a terrible burden. Admiral Sullivan retired from active service 2 years after the battle, She had spent her entire adult life preparing for war with aliens, and when that war came, she had led humanity to victory. But the cost haunted her. She established a foundation in Danny's name, dedicated to training and supporting young seers so that no child would ever have to face what Danny had faced alone. On the 5th anniversary of the victory, Lisa and Greg Harper traveled to the memorial in New Geneva. They stood before their son's statue, holding each other as thousands of people came to pay their respects. Flowers covered the base of the monument, along with drawings from children who saw Danny as a hero, messages from people whose lives he had saved, and gifts from grateful alien species across the galaxy. He would have been 13, Lisa said quietly, starting to think about high school. Maybe interested in girls, definitely still drawing those pictures of stars. He's still with us, Greg replied. Every time a seer helps someone, every time humanity makes a good choice because we can see a little bit of the future, that's Danny's gift to us. I know, Lisa said. But I miss my baby. Me too. They weren't alone in their grief. Across human space, memorials were held for all those who had died in the battle. The crews of escort ships who had given their lives protecting the Pathfinder. The fleet personnel who had bought time with their blood. Dr. Price, who had believed in Danny and stayed with him to the end. Captain Shaw and her crew, who had flown into hell without hesitation. The war changed humanity in fundamental ways. They had faced extinction and survived through the sacrifice of their best people. The old divisions between Earth and the colonies, between nations and ideologies, seemed petty and pointless now. Humanity united in ways it never had before, understanding that they were all part of something larger than themselves. Technology advanced rapidly in the decade following the victory. Engineers studied the remains of harvester ships, learning from their crystalline technology and quantum processors. The ghost field generators that had been built in desperation became standard equipment on all human vessels. Weapons were redesigned based on the resonance weapons principles, though without a seer to guide them, they weren't nearly as effective. Humanity also began exploring the galaxy more boldly, establishing contact with the species that had survived the harvester attacks. Together they formed a loose alliance dedicated to mutual protection and sharing of knowledge. Humanity's role in defeating the harvesters gave them respect and influence far beyond what their relatively young civilization would normally command. The seers became an integral part of society. They weren't treated as weapons or tools, but as guides and advisors. They helped with everything from navigation to diplomacy, their ability to glimpse possible futures making them invaluable. But they were also protected, kept safe from those who might want to exploit their abilities. Admiral Sullivan's foundation ensured that every seer received proper training and support, and that none would ever be forced into service as Danny had been. 10 years after the battle, Lisa Harper published a book about her son. She called it The Boy Who Saw Tomorrow, and it became a bestseller across human space. She wrote honestly about Danny's struggles, his fears, and his courage. She shared his drawings and his words, giving people a glimpse of the child behind the hero. The book ended with a letter Danny had written to his parents the night before the final mission. He had given it to a nurse with instructions to deliver it only if he didn't return. In the letter, he told them he loved them and thanked them for being good parents. He said he wasn't afraid because he knew what he was doing mattered. And he asked them not to be sad, because he had seen a beautiful future for humanity, and he was happy knowing he had helped make it possible. I saw us spreading across the stars, Danny had written in his child's handwriting, building cities on 1,000 worlds, making friends with aliens who are kind and smart, learning things we never imagined, being more than we are now, being better. That future is real and I helped make it happen. So don't cry for me. Be happy that we all get to live in the world I saw. 20 years after the battle on Danny's birthday, humanity observed a day of remembrance. Schools taught children about the Harvester War and the sacrifices that had been made. Planet-wide moments of silence honored the fallen, and in New Geneva, Lisa Harper, now an old woman, placed flowers at her son's statue as she had done every year. "Happy birthday, Danny," she whispered. "You would have been 28 today. I wonder who you would have become, what you would have accomplished with a full life." But even as she spoke, she looked around at the thriving city. The Pathfinder was the newest ship in the human fleet, built using cutting-edge stealth technology that made it nearly invisible to conventional sensors. It was small compared to warships designed for speed and evasion rather than combat. Now it carried the most precious cargo in human history, an 8-year-old boy who held the key to survival. Captain Linda Shaw commanded the Pathfinder. She was a veteran pilot with 20 years of experience flying through dangerous space, but nothing had prepared her for this mission. They were going to fly straight into a fleet of alien ships that had destroyed everything in their path. The only thing protecting them was stealth technology that had never been tested against harvester sensors. Cargo secure. Lieutenant Martinez reported from the bay where they had installed the resonance weapon. Danny lay in the neural chair, connected to the quantum processors by dozens of cables. Dr. Price sat beside him, monitoring his vital signs. The boy looked so small, so fragile. It seemed impossible that he could be humanity's savior. All systems green. The Pathfinder's engineer called out. Stealth field at maximum. We're ready to launch. Captain Shaw took a deep breath. Take us out. Plot a course to the center of the Harvester formation, and pray to whatever gods are listening that we make it. The Pathfinder lifted off from the mountain facility and climbed toward space. Below them, Earth spread out in all its beauty, blue oceans and green continents wrapped in white clouds. Danny watched through a monitor screen, wondering if he would ever see his home again. Probably not, he thought. But that was okay if everyone else got to live. As they cleared the atmosphere, the full scope of the battle became visible. The space around Earth was filled with fire and death. Human ships fought desperately against the harvesters, but they were losing badly. For every alien ship damaged, a dozen human vessels were destroyed. The wreckage of hundreds of ships drifted through the void, crystalline dust mixed with human metal. Admiral Sullivan's voice came over the communication channel. Pathfinder, you are clear for your approach. The fleet will cover your advance. Good luck, Captain Shaw. And Danny, if you can hear me, thank you. Whatever happens today, you've already given humanity more than anyone could ask. Danny wanted to respond, to say something brave or inspiring. But the neural interface was already pulling him deeper into the quantum network. His consciousness expanded again, spreading out beyond the ship and into space. He could feel the harvesters drawing closer, their collective mind focused on destroying the human fleet. 6 escort ships accompanied the Pathfinder, volunteers who knew they were flying to their deaths. Their job was to draw fire away from the stealth vessel, to sacrifice themselves so Danny could reach his destination. The pilots were silent as they flew, each one alone with their thoughts and fears. The formation plunged toward the harvester fleet. The escort ship spread out, creating a protective screen around the Pathfinder. For a few precious minutes, the stealth technology worked perfectly. The harvesters seemed unaware of their approach, focused on the larger battle with Admiral Sullivan's forces. Then everything went wrong. The harvesters adapted, switching to a sensor mode that could detect the Pathfinder's unique energy signature. Suddenly, every enemy ship in the area turned toward them, weapons charging with lethal light. They see us, Captain Shaw shouted. Evasive maneuvers. The escort ships immediately engaged, throwing themselves between the Pathfinder and the enemy. Beams of light cut through space, and one by one the brave volunteers died. They bought seconds, maybe a minute at most, but they died fighting. Captain Shaw pushed the Pathfinder to its limits, dodging between destroyed ships and debris fields. The vessel shook from near misses, alarms screaming as systems took damage. In the cargo bay, Dr. Price held onto her seat as the ship bucked and rolled. How much further? She called to the bridge. 2 minutes to optimal range, Captain Shaw replied. If we can survive that long. Danny barely heard them. His consciousness was almost fully in the quantum network now, his physical body just an anchor point. He could see everything, feel everything. He felt every human who died in the battle, their lives snuffed out in instants. He felt the cold intelligence of the harvesters, utterly focused on their goal of consuming all organic life. But he also felt something else. A connection forming between his mind and the resonance weapon. The quantum processors were amplifying his consciousness, giving him the power to broadcast the disruption frequency across impossible distances. He just needed to get a little closer. Another escort ship died, leaving only one between the Pathfinder and the harvesters. The pilot was a woman named Captain Amy Foster, and she fought like a warrior from ancient legends. Her ship danced through enemy fire, her weapons striking back even though she knew they were useless. She was buying time for Danny, and she did it with grace and courage. Go, Captain Foster said over the radio. her voice steady even as her ship took critical damage. "I'll hold them as long as I can. Save us all, kid." Her ship exploded in a brilliant flash and the Pathfinder was alone. Harvester ships closed in from all sides, weapons charging for the final strike. Captain Shaw knew they were out of time. "We're not going to make it to optimal range," she said, her voice grim. Dr. Price made a decision. "It doesn't matter. We're close enough. Danny, can you hear me?" Deep in the quantum network, Danny heard her voice like a distant echo. "Yes, we need to do this now," Dr. Price said. "I'm going to give you full power, all the energy the weapon can produce. It's going to hurt, Danny, it might even kill you. But it's our only chance," Danny understood. He had seen this moment in his visions countless times. He had always known it would come to this. "Do it," he said. "Save everyone." Dr. Price's hand shook as she entered the commands. The resonance weapon began drawing massive amounts of power from the ship's reactors. Energy flowed into the quantum processors, amplifying Danny's consciousness to impossible levels. His brain activity spiked beyond anything that should be survivable. Danny screamed as pain like nothing he had ever imagined tore through him. It felt like his mind was being ripped apart and rebuilt 1,000 times per second. But he held on to the memory of his parents' love, to the faces of all the people who were depending on him. And then he was there, his consciousness touching the heart of the Harvester Collective. He felt their ancient minds recoil in surprise. They had never encountered anything like him. A human child who could reach across space and touch their synchronized network. For the first time in millions of years, the Harvesters felt something like fear. Danny broadcast the disruption frequency with all the power the weapon could provide. The signal spread through the Harvester fleet at faster than light speeds, carried by the same quantum-entangled particles they used to coordinate. It was like throwing a rock into a perfectly still pond, ripples spreading out and disrupting the harmony. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the solar system, Harvester ships began to falter. Their perfect synchronization broke down as the disruption frequency scrambled their shared consciousness. Ships collided with each other, weapons fired randomly, engines shut down. The mighty fleet descended into chaos. Admiral Sullivan saw it happening and couldn't believe her eyes. "All ships focus fire on the largest vessels," she ordered. "They're vulnerable. Hit them now." The human fleet surged forward, pouring everything they had into the confused enemy. Railgun slugs and missiles struck Harvester hulls that were no longer absorbing damage efficiently. For the first time in the battle, alien ships began to break apart, their crystalline structures shattering under sustained fire. But the Harvesters weren't defeated yet. They quickly realized what was happening and turned their full attention toward the source of the disruption. Every ship within range redirected toward the Pathfinder, determined to eliminate the threat. "Multiple targets incoming," Captain Shaw reported, her voice tight. "I can't avoid them all." The Pathfinder took its first direct hit. The beam of light punched through the hull, venting atmosphere and destroying the starboard engine. The ship spun out of control, alarms screaming as systems failed throughout the vessel. Dr. Price was thrown from her seat, hitting the wall hard. Blood ran down her face, but she pulled herself back to the weapon controls. Danny was still broadcasting the frequency, his body convulsing from the strain. She knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. The neural load was killing him. Another hit struck the ship, this time tearing through the engineering section. The power generators began to fail, reducing the weapon's amplification. Danny's signal weakened and the Harvesters started to recover their coordination. Dr. Price looked at the power readings and made her final decision. She could reroute all remaining power to the weapon, giving Danny one last massive burst, but it would destroy the ship and everyone aboard. There would be no chance of rescue, no hope of survival. "Danny," she said softly, "I'm going to give you everything we have left. One final pulse. Make it count, I will," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for believing in me." Dr. Price entered the commands with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for saving us all." The weapon drew every last bit of energy from the dying ship. The quantum processors glowed white. 3 months passed, and Danny's visions only grew stronger. Dr. Helen Price met with him twice a week, studying his brain patterns and trying to understand the mechanism behind his abilities. She had shared her findings with a few trusted colleagues, but most dismissed her theories as impossible. The human brain simply couldn't receive information from across space and time. It violated everything they knew about physics. But Dr. Price believed Danny. She had seen too much evidence to ignore it. The mathematical formulas he produced were real equations used in quantum mechanics. The star charts he drew matched actual stellar formations in unexplored regions of space. An 8-year-old boy from New Seattle should not know these things, yet he did. Danny's parents struggled to cope with their son's burden. Lisa wanted to take him away, to flee to the furthest colony where maybe the visions would stop. Greg tried to stay strong, but he could see the fear growing in his son's eyes. Danny was carrying knowledge that would crush most adults, and he was still just a child. At school, Danny stopped playing with other children. He would sit alone, during recess, drawing in his notebook or staring at the sky. His teachers grew concerned, but what could they tell them? That their son saw the end of the world in his dreams. That wouldn't help anyone. Then came the day that changed everything. The day Danny's predictions came true. It started with a simple news alert. The deep space monitoring station at the frontier had gone silent. Communications were down. The station housed 43 people, scientists and engineers, who watched the edges of human space for any signs of danger. Losing contact was unusual, but not unheard of. Equipment failed sometimes. Solar storms could disrupt signals. The Defense Council sent a rescue ship to investigate. It took 2 weeks for the vessel to reach the station. What they found made grown soldiers weep. The station was gone, not destroyed in the usual sense, but transformed. The entire structure had been converted into a crystalline substance that looked like glass, but was unlike any material known to science. Everything organic had vanished. The people, the plants in the hydroponics bay, even the bacteria in the air filters, all gone, converted into pure energy. Only one thing remained. The station's final transmission recorded in the emergency black box that had somehow survived. The recording showed the moment of attack, massive geometric ships appearing from nowhere, filling the view screens, then a wave of light washing over everything and the screaming stopped. The Defense Council called an emergency meeting. They brought in military leaders, scientists, and anyone who might understand what had happened. And they brought Danny Harper. Danny sat in a chair that was too big for him, surrounded by important people in expensive suits. Admiral Kate Sullivan studied the small boy with sharp eyes. She had spent 30 years in the military, preparing humanity for the day they would meet hostile aliens. That day had apparently arrived. "Tell us what you know," Admiral Sullivan said gently. She didn't talk down to Danny or treat him like a child. She spoke to him like a fellow soldier, and Danny appreciated that. "They're called the Harvesters," Danny began, his voice steady despite his fear. "They're not like us. They're not even alive the way we think of life. They're silicon-based, a kind of collective intelligence that exists in crystal form. They travel the galaxy looking for organic matter to consume. They turn it into energy to fuel their ships and their expansion." "How do you know this?" asked General Paul Harris, his voice skeptical. "I see it," Danny said simply. "In my head. I don't know how or why, but I can see things that are happening far away. Things that will happen in the future. Dr. Price thinks, my brain is receiving information through quantum entanglement, whatever that means." Dr. Price stepped forward. "If I may explain, my research suggests that Danny's neural structure allows him to receive data transmitted through quantum entangled particles. This means his consciousness is somehow connected to events across space-time. He's essentially seeing through a window that most human brains can't access." "That's impossible," General Harris said. "So were the readings from the destroyed station," Admiral Sullivan pointed out. "Until today, we didn't believe in faster-than-light travel that didn't use hyperspace gates. These harvesters apparently do it easily. Maybe it's time we accept that impossible things are possible." Danny continued his explanation. "They've destroyed thousands of civilizations, maybe millions. They've been doing this for longer than humans have existed. They're drawn to worlds with technology because those worlds have concentrated energy. Earth is bright to them like a beacon. They're coming, and they'll be here in 3 months." The room fell silent. 3 months. It wasn't enough time. How could humanity prepare for an enemy that could turn matter into energy with a wave of light? "Is there any way to fight them?" Admiral Sullivan asked. "Any weakness?" Danny nodded slowly. "Yes. But it's complicated. The harvesters work as a collective consciousness. They all share one mind, synchronized across their entire fleet. That's their strength, but it's also their weakness. If we could disrupt that synchronization, if we could break their connection, they would become vulnerable. How do we do that? I don't know yet, Danny admitted. My visions show me pieces, but not the whole picture. I keep seeing something called a resonance key. It's important, but I can't see what it is or how it works. Admiral Sullivan made a decision. We evacuate the outer colonies immediately. Bring everyone closer to Earth where we can protect them. And we start building defenses. If we only have 3 months, we use every second. Over the following weeks, humanity mobilized like never before. Colonies on the frontier were abandoned as millions of people crowded onto transport ships heading to the inner worlds. The military assembled every vessel they had, creating the United Fleet under Admiral Sullivan's command. Scientists worked, day and night, trying to develop weapons that could fight an enemy who manipulated matter itself. Danny was moved to a secure facility in the Rocky Mountains. Dr. Price came with him, along with a team of specialists who would help him control and interpret his visions. They built a special room where Danny could project what he saw onto holographic displays, making it easier for others to understand. The visions came almost constantly now. Danny barely slept. He would lie in bed and see the harvesters advancing through space, destroying everything in their path. He saw the faces of people who would die, heard their voices calling for help that would never come. The weight of it was crushing him. But he also saw something else. Fragments of hope scattered through the darkness. He saw one species that had survived the harvesters by hiding underground and developing technology that masked biological signatures. He saw ancient weapons that had failed but contained useful principles. He saw mathematical formulas that might, just might, give humanity a fighting chance. Danny shared everything he could. Engineers studied his drawings and began developing what they called ghost field generators. These devices could theoretically hide biological signatures from the harvesters' sensors. If they worked, humanity could hide its colonies and strike from ambush. Weapons designers created prototypes for a frequency disruption device based on Danny's visions. But they were missing something crucial, the resonance key that Danny kept mentioning. Without it, the weapon was useless. 2 months before the predicted arrival date, more colonies went dark. The harvesters were ahead of schedule, attacking settlements on the frontier faster than expected. Billions of people fled toward Earth, creating chaos as refugee ships overwhelmed the inner world's capacity. Danny's parents stayed with him at the facility. Lisa held her son when the nightmares came. Greg read him stories at night, trying to give him some measure of normal childhood in the middle of preparing for war. They watched their boy grow thinner and paler as the visions drained him, and they felt helpless to ease his suffering. One night, Danny woke up screaming. Dr. Price rushed to his room and found him sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with revelation. "I know what the resonance key is," he whispered. "I finally see it clearly." "What is it?" Dr. Price asked, though part of her already suspected the answer and dreaded it. "It's me," Danny said, tears running down his face. "The weapon needs a human consciousness to work. Someone with abilities like mine. Someone who can process the data in real time and adapt the frequency to counter the harvester's defenses. The resonance key isn't a thing, it's a person." Dr. Price felt her heart break. She had dedicated her life to science, to understanding the mysteries of the human mind, but she had never imagined that her research would lead to this. A child would have to sacrifice himself to save humanity. "We'll find another way," she said firmly. "There has to be another solution." But Danny shook his head. "There isn't. I've seen all the possibilities. This is the only path where we win." Outside the facility, in the dark sky above the mountains, stars began to disappear. One by one, they winked out as something massive moved between them and Earth. The harvesters were no longer weeks away. They had arrived early, and they were closer than anyone had feared. Alarms began to sound across the planet. The United Fleet scrambled to defensive positions. And in his room in the mountains, Danny Harper understood that his time had come. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiant, watching the sensors track the approaching enemy. The harvesters had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, and what the sensors showed made even veteran officers feel afraid. There were hundreds of them, each ship larger than any human vessel ever built. They moved in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls reflecting starlight like enormous jewels. The United Fleet was assembled around Earth in defensive positions. Every warship humanity possessed was here, along with hastily constructed defense platforms and orbital weapons. It looked impressive, a show of human strength and determination. But Admiral Sullivan knew it probably wouldn't be enough. The harvesters had destroyed civilizations more advanced than humanity. What chance did they have? "All ships report ready, Admiral," her communications officer said. "Good," Admiral Sullivan replied. "Tell them to hold position. We wait for them to come to us." Meanwhile, in the mountain facility, Danny was being prepared for his role in the desperate plan. Dr. Price and her team had built the resonance weapon based on his visions, but they still hoped to find an alternative to using Danny himself as its core processor. They had tried AI systems, quantum computers, even volunteers with enhanced neural implants. Nothing worked. The weapon required something unique about Danny's brain, something that couldn't be replicated. Lisa Harper refused to accept it. "He's 8 years old," she said, her voice breaking. "We can't ask him to do this. There has to be another way." "There isn't, Mom," Danny said quietly. He stood in the doorway wearing a hospital gown, looking small and fragile. "I've seen what happens if we don't try. Everyone dies. Earth dies. All the colonies die. Everything we are, everything we could be, it all ends. At least this way, most people survive." "You're my baby," Lisa whispered, pulling him into her arms. "I'm supposed to protect you." "You did," Danny said, hugging her back. "You gave me a good life. You made me strong enough for this." Greg Harper stood nearby, unable to speak. He wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all, to demand that someone else bear this burden, but he knew his son was right. Danny had been given these visions for a reason. He was the key to humanity's survival, and no amount of parental love could change that fact. Dr. Price gave them privacy for their goodbyes. She went to the laboratory where the resonance weapon waited. It looked like a large chair surrounded by quantum processors and neural interface equipment. Cables ran from it to power generators that could produce enormous amounts of energy in controlled bursts. The whole thing had been built in desperate haste, and there had been no time for proper testing. "Will it work?" asked Lieutenant Chris Martinez, the military liaison assigned to the project. "I don't know," Dr. Price admitted. "The theory is sound. Danny's consciousness, amplified by the weapon, should be able to calculate and broadcast the disruption frequency needed to break the harvester's synchronized mind. But there are so many variables. If any component fails, if the power fluctuates even slightly, the whole thing could collapse." "And Danny?" Dr. Price looked away. "The neural load will be immense. His brain will be processing data at speeds that should be impossible. Even if everything works perfectly, the strain might be too much. He might not survive the experience. He knows that?" "Yes, he's known from the beginning." Lieutenant Martinez shook his head in wonder. 8 years old and braver than any soldier I've ever met. In orbit above Earth, the first engagement began. A squadron of harvester ships broke away from the main fleet and approached the outer defensive line. Human warships opened fire with railguns, missiles, and laser batteries. The weapons struck the crystalline hulls and simply vanished, absorbed into the strange material without causing damage. Then the harvesters returned fire. Waves of light washed over 3 human destroyers, and in seconds they were gone, transformed into crystalline dust that scattered in the solar wind. 200 people died without even having time to scream. "All ships fall back to second defensive line," Admiral Sullivan ordered, her voice calm despite the horror she had just witnessed. "Activate ghost field generators." Across human space, the generators powered up. These devices created fields that masked biological signatures, making ships and colonies invisible to the harvesters' sensors. The technology was untested, built from Danny's visions with no time for refinement. But it was all they had. The ghost fields worked partially. The harvesters seemed confused, their perfect formation breaking slightly as they searched for targets. But they adapted quickly, switching to different sensor modes. Within minutes, they had located the hidden human forces and resumed their advance. "They're learning," Admiral Sullivan said, "adjusting their tactics. We need that frequency weapon operational now. In the mountain facility, Danny said goodbye to his parents one final time. He hugged his mother until she couldn't hold him anymore, then shook his father's hand like a man going off to war. They were both crying, but Danny stayed calm. He had seen this moment in his visions 1,000 times. He knew what was coming. Dr. Price led him to the weapon chamber. Technicians helped him into the chair, attaching neural sensors to his head and connecting IV lines to provide his body with fluids and medications. The chair would keep him alive while his consciousness expanded into the quantum network. "Are you ready?" Dr. Price asked. "Yes," Danny said, "but I'm scared." "Being scared is okay," she told him. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Will you stay with me?" "Every second," Dr. Price promised. "I won't leave you alone." Danny closed his eyes as the neural interface activated. His consciousness began to expand, stretching beyond his body and into the quantum processors. He felt himself growing larger, his awareness spreading through space like ripples on water. He could sense the harvesters now, feel their collective mind humming with ancient intelligence. They were old, so terribly old, and they had seen the rise and fall of countless species. To them, humanity was just another meal, another source of energy to fuel their endless hunger. But humanity was different. Humans dreamed. They hoped. They fought even when fighting seemed hopeless. And they produced children like Danny Harper, who could see across time and space, who could touch the very fabric of reality and bend it to their will. Danny reached out with his expanded consciousness and began to understand the harvester's synchronization. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a perfect harmony of billions of minds acting as one. Every ship was a node in the network, every thought shared instantly across the collective. That unity made them powerful beyond measure, but it also made them vulnerable. Danny began calculating the disruption frequency, his mind processing millions of variables per second. He needed to find the exact pattern that would shatter their harmony, the precise note that would turn their greatest strength into fatal weakness. In orbit, Admiral Sullivan ordered the fleet to engage. It was a desperate gambit, buying time for Danny to complete his work. Human ships charged toward the harvester formation, weapons blazing. They knew they couldn't win this fight with conventional means, but they could distract the enemy, draw their attention away from Earth. The harvesters responded with overwhelming force. Their light weapons cut through human vessels like paper, leaving nothing but crystalline debris. Ship after ship died, their crews sacrificed to buy precious seconds. Admiral Sullivan watched good people die and forced herself to stay focused. Their sacrifice had to mean something. On the surface of Earth, billions of people watched the battle unfold on screens and viewports. They saw their defenders falling, saw the enemy advancing relentlessly. Parents held their children. Friends embraced. Strangers prayed together in the streets. Everyone knew that if the fleet failed, if Danny's weapon didn't work, this would be humanity's final day. In the weapon chamber, Danny screamed. The strain was even worse than he had imagined. His brain felt like it was burning, neural pathways overloading from the impossible amount of data he was processing. But he couldn't stop. He was so close to finding the right frequency. Just a little more time. Dr. Price monitored his vital signs with growing alarm. His heart rate was dangerously high, his brain activity off the charts. Much more of this and he would suffer permanent damage or death. But she couldn't pull him out now. The fate of humanity rested on the small boy's shoulders. "Hold on, Danny," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Danny's consciousness stretched further, reaching out to touch every harvester ship in the system. He felt their minds cold and logical and utterly without mercy. They had no concept of compassion or remorse. They simply consumed and moved on as they had for millions of years. But Danny had something they didn't. He had love. The memory of his mother's embrace, his father's pride, Dr. Price's dedication. He had the knowledge that billions of people were counting on him, trusting him with their lives. That love and trust gave him strength beyond his years. And finally, after what felt like an eternity of calculation and pain, Danny found it. The resonance key. The exact frequency that would disrupt the harvester's synchronization. It was like a musical note that only his mind could hear. A pattern hidden in the quantum foam of reality itself. "I have it," he gasped, his voice barely audible. Danny Harper was different from other children, though his parents tried not to think about it too much. He was 8 years old and lived in New Seattle, a gleaming city built on the ruins of the old one. The year was 2247, and humanity had spread across the stars, building homes on distant planets and moons. But Danny never cared much about space travel or the colonies. He was too busy with the pictures in his head. The pictures came at night mostly. Dreams that felt too real to be dreams. Danny would see things that made no sense to a young boy. Giant structures made of crystal floating through darkness, planets breaking apart like glass, waves of light that turned everything to dust. He would wake up screaming, and his mother Lisa would run to his room and hold him until the shaking stopped. "It's just nightmares, honey," she would whisper, stroking his hair. "Nothing can hurt you here." But Danny knew better. The pictures were trying to tell him something important. Something bad was coming. He just didn't know what it was yet. His father, Greg, worked at the shipyards, building vessels that traveled between stars. His mother taught music at the local school. They were normal people living normal lives, and they wanted the same for their son. But normal was not something Danny could be. On Tuesday morning, everything changed. Danny was at school, sitting in the playground during recess. His classmates were playing gravity ball, a game where you tried to catch a floating sphere that could change its weight at random. Danny usually loved the game, but today he felt strange. His head hurt and the world seemed too bright. Then it happened. The vision hit him like a wall of water, drowning out everything else. He saw them clearly for the first time. Ships. Enormous ships that looked like they were carved from living crystal. They moved through space with terrible purpose, and wherever they went, life ended. Planets full of people, cities full of light, all turned to nothing in seconds. He saw billions dying. He heard their screams echoing across the void. And then he saw Earth. Beautiful blue Earth, wrapped in clouds and light. The crystal ships were coming toward it, and Danny knew with absolute certainty that they would do to his home what they had done to 1,000 other worlds. Someone was shaking him. A teacher was calling his name. Danny opened his eyes and found himself lying on the ground. His classmates gathered around him in a worried circle. His nose was bleeding and his whole body hurt like he had fallen from a great height. "Get the nurse," the teacher said, her voice tight with concern. "Hurry." They took Danny to the medical center in an ambulance. His parents met him there, their faces pale with fear. The doctors ran tests, scanning his brain with machines that hummed and clicked. They found nothing wrong. No tumors, no injuries, no disease. Just a healthy 8-year-old boy who had collapsed for no reason. Probably just stress, one doctor said. "Children can be sensitive to pressure." "Is anything bothering him at school?" "No," Lisa said firmly. "Danny loves school."
"He has friends."
Everything is fine, but everything was not fine. Danny knew it, even if he couldn't explain it. How could he tell them what he had seen? They would think he was crazy. They would give him medicine and send him to a psychiatrist. Nobody would believe that an 8-year-old boy could see the future. When they took him home that evening, Danny tried to act normal. He ate his dinner and did his homework and said goodnight to his parents at bedtime. But when he closed his eyes, the visions came again. This time they were clearer. He saw mathematical formulas that he didn't understand but somehow knew were important. He saw star charts showing pathways through space. He saw a countdown, numbers falling like rain, marking the time until the crystal ships arrived. 6 months. That's all the time Earth had left. The next morning, Danny did something he had never done before. He took his notebook and started drawing. His hand moved almost by itself, sketching the crystal ships in detail. He drew their weapons, their engines, the way they folded space to travel faster than light. He filled page after page with information that no child should know. His mother found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by drawings. She picked one up and stared at it, her expression confused. "Danny, what is this?" "They're called the Harvesters," Danny said quietly. "They eat planets. They turn everything into energy so they can keep moving, keep feeding. They've been doing it for millions of years." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Her son's voice was wrong, too calm, too certain, and the drawings were too detailed, too technical. These weren't the scribbles of a child's imagination. "Where did you learn about this?" she asked. "I see them," Danny said, looking up at her with eyes that seemed much older than 8 years. "In my head. They show me things. They're trying to warn us." Lisa wanted to dismiss it. She wanted to believe her son was just going through a phase, that he had seen something scary on the news and his imagination was running wild. But deep down, she knew this was different. This was real. She called Greg at work and told him to come home. When he arrived and saw the drawings, his face went pale. Greg had worked with spacecraft his entire adult life. He knew technology when he saw it, and what Danny had drawn was beyond anything humanity had built. "We need to show this to someone," Greg said. "Someone who can make sense of it." That afternoon, they took Danny and his drawings to the university. They met with scientists, engineers, people who studied space and physics and things beyond normal understanding. Most of them looked at Danny's work and smiled politely, treating him like a child, with an overactive imagination. But one person took him seriously. Dr. Helen Price was a neuroscientist who studied how the human brain was changing as humanity spread across the galaxy. She had theories that space travel and exposure to new environments were triggering dormant abilities in some people. When she saw Danny's drawings and heard his story, she didn't laugh. Instead, she asked him to come to her laboratory. At the lab, Dr. Price connected Danny to machines that could read his brain activity. What she saw made her hands shake. Danny's neural patterns were unlike anything in the medical records. His brain was processing information at impossible speeds, and there were signals coming in that had no source. It was as if his mind was receiving broadcasts from somewhere far away. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Price whispered. "Danny, has anyone else in your family ever had experiences like yours?" "No," Danny said. "Just me." "And when did the visions start?" "I've always had strange dreams," Danny explained. "But they got stronger a few months ago, and now I can see things even when I'm awake." Dr. Price saved all the data from her scans. She promised Danny's parents that she would study the results and try to understand what was happening. But privately, she felt a growing sense of dread. If what Danny saw was real, if these harvesters were truly coming, then humanity had very little time to prepare. That night, far away at the edge of human-controlled space, a monitoring station detected something unusual. Strange gravitational waves were rippling through space, coming from beyond the frontier. The readings made no sense. They matched nothing in the database of known phenomena. Commander Jake Morrison filed a report and sent it to Earth's Defense Council. But without proof of immediate danger, the report was simply added to a file and forgotten. After all, space was full of mysteries. Not every strange reading meant trouble, but Danny knew better. That night he lay in bed and felt the harvesters drawing closer. In his mind's eye, he could see them clearly now. Massive and ancient and hungry. They had consumed entire civilizations, turned thriving worlds into dead husks. And now they were coming for Earth. He was just a child, small and scared and alone with knowledge that no one would believe. But somehow Danny understood that he was the key to everything. The visions had chosen him for a reason. He would have to find a way to make people listen, to make them understand the danger before it was too late. The clock was ticking, 6 months until the end of everything.